Torn between love and tradition, my 32-year-old boyfriend fears his family's approval more than our future. I need my dad's permission, he says, while I wonder, am I enough to break the cycle? Will we marry or will he choose his past over our present? My boyfriend, age 32, and I, age 39, are either concluding our narrative or embarking on a new chapter in our love story. To marry or not to marry. Longest Reddit post in history. This will be a lengthy post, and I apologize in advance. I'm a 39-year-old female, and my boyfriend, fiance, and roommate is a 32-year-old male. We met for the first time on August 15, 2022, and there was an immediate attraction for both of us. I asked him if he had a Facebook account as it seemed less forward than asking for his phone number, but I wanted to see him or at least talk to him again. He said, no, I deleted it to escape my crazy ex. Before diving too deep into the story, let me provide some background for context. He comes from a large, strict Romanian Pentecostal family, being the oldest of 11 children with the same parents. Sadly, his mother passed away a little over 7 years ago. In their culture, or perhaps just in his family, children are expected to remain at home until their wedding day. After marriage, they can then leave to live with their spouse, but until that point it is considered taboo to move out, regardless of one's stage of adulthood. I have been raised in the Christian faith, holding many similar beliefs as he and his family do, but I have never been part of a particular church or denomination. As an only child, I experienced abandonment when my father left my mother and me when I was just 8 years old. Before that, I witnessed considerable abuse and domestic violence and was neglected by my father. Once he was out of the picture, my mother removed me from school, supposedly to homeschool me, but that never occurred. I was both parentified and isolated. I grew up in poverty, my mother never worked, my father never paid child support, and the only income was $200 a month from a small home rental that my mother owned at the time, supplemented by the charity of churches and kind strangers. Moving forward, I ended up marrying at 19 to my first husband, who is also the father of my now 18-year-old son. My mother maliciously manipulated us into living with her, and since I lacked experience and knew no better, we complied. I genuinely loved him and intended for it to last forever. However, shortly after my oldest son was born, issues arose that compelled us to leave my mother's home. During this challenging time, I discovered that my first husband was a wanted child predator in the state of California. They arrested him, and once I became aware, I filed for divorce. This situation posed a risk to my child, and I was not prepared to accept that possibility. By this point, I was 21. I met another man at work, and to summarize, I ended up marrying him. I had good intentions, believing we would be fine, but after marrying, he turned abusive and cruel. He did terrible things to me and was not good to my son, leading me to end the marriage after 6 years. I could no longer endure the abuse, nor did I wish that life for my son. I had a year-long relationship after that, but thankfully I never married that man, as he turned out to be worse than the previous one. I ended that before it worsened. I then met a man who had been an acquaintance of my mother and me for years. This occurred in January 2014, and we dated for a while before getting married. Once again, I believed this would be my stability, allowing me to live the remainder of my life in a peaceful, happy marriage. At that point, I was 29 and he was 52. I spent 9 years with him, 8 of which we cohabitated. Initially, things were relatively good. He was not abusive or unkind. However, early in our marriage, his mother, may she rest in peace, once told me, "He's going to change one day." I didn't comprehend her words at the time, but a few years later, I began to understand. He grew increasingly cold and distant, withholding intimacy and affection. At one point, he stopped working altogether, preferring to stay home, playing video games, obsessively programming, or working on unfinished writing projects. The lack of affection started in late 2016 and progressively worsened. In 2017, I expressed my feelings of neglect and loneliness, explaining that he was too busy with his computer and not fulfilling the needs that a husband should meet. We briefly attempted to address the issue, but it eventually returned to the way it was, getting worse over time. Fast forward to the COVID-19 era. I took some time off work, and during that period, he absolutely gave up on any work. Even while we were home together, there was still no intimacy, passion, or love. By the end of 2021, I resumed working while he remained unemployed. During the pandemic, I managed our finances, even selling some cherished possessions to pay his mortgage. He owned a house prior to our marriage, yet he never included me on any mortgage paperwork, utilities, or the property deed. It was as if I did not exist in that context, but I ensured the bills got paid. I handled all financial responsibilities. He did not assist, which would have been acceptable if he contributed in other ways, such as maintaining a clean home, but he did not. The house remained cluttered, as he refused to allow me to clean it properly. By some miracle, I had a baby who was born in August 2021. Throughout the period from late 2016 to August 2022, I pleaded with him to step up. I told him at the beginning of 2022 that I was starting to develop feelings for other people, expressing my desire to work things out but admitting I couldn't do it alone. I asked him to show me some love, acknowledge me, or even greet me when I came home from work. Unfortunately, my requests fell on deaf ears. Every time I arrived home, he was either playing on his computer or asleep, never acknowledging my presence. It turned out he had a deep affection for another woman whom he met when she was 12 years old while he was around 21. He claimed to have fallen for her then but ended up with her mother, reasoning that if he were with her mother, she would not be abusive to the girl. After separating from the mother, he pursued the girl once she reached maturity, but their relationship also failed. He held out for her for 25 years until reconnecting with me in 2014 when he suddenly decided I was the one. However, upon learning this, observing how he lit up whenever her name came up, and hearing the excitement in his voice, I realized he was still, in some twisted way, in love with her. After much unreciprocated effort, I eventually felt very lonely. Now let me share the story of my boyfriend, which leads back to our narrative and the reason I am posting here. My boyfriend left his family home in February 2020, moving out to attempt to reconnect with his crazy ex, as he referred to her. Here's the crux. She was an escort, and despite using the services of many escorts since around 2016 or 2017, he wanted to give the world to this particular one. He was deeply infatuated, and after getting involved with her, she introduced him to methamphetamine, taking everything from him both financially and emotionally. He attempted to leave her a couple of times but always returned. When I finally met him on August 15, 2022, he had just recently escaped from her grasp once more. He had been sober from methamphetamine since July 23, 2022, making him fresh out of a bad situation and out of drugs. We met in a work training class. After he mentioned not having a Facebook account, we talked for a few minutes before parting ways. I thought of him quite a bit afterward, wondering how he was doing and hoping to see him again. Fast forward to August 31, 2022. I spotted him heading in to clock out as I was leaving the parking lot. When I saw him, I decided to stop and call out to him. He didn't hear me at first, and although I hesitated, I honked the horn lightly to catch his attention. I called over to him, asking how he had been, and told him I remembered him. He approached and confirmed that he remembered me too. During our brief conversation, I told him, I am married and cannot be more than friends, but would you like to go to the Quick Trip, a popular convenience store chain in our area, for a donut and some iced tea sometime to talk? He agreed that it would be nice and acknowledged my marital status, stating that we could remain friends. However, if we are honest, I believe we both knew we desired more. He provided me with his phone number, and I texted him later that night to set up a meeting for the next evening, September 1, 2022. When the time came, I waited for him at the Quick Trip. He called to warn me that he needed to tell me something that might be a deal breaker for me and suggested I let him know if it was, promising there would be no hard feelings. I responded, okay, what is it? He said, I am homeless. I am living at the shelter trying to get back on my feet, but I'm currently homeless. I replied, is that it? He affirmed, yes. I said, don't be ridiculous, that's not a deal breaker. I still want to hang out with you, so please come over. He hesitated, asking if I was sure, but I reassured him that I was. He arrived shortly thereafter. I got us something to eat and a couple of drinks, and we sat at the table outside, talking endlessly. At one point, he looked deeply into my eyes, revealing an intensity that felt like he was peering into my soul. He possesses beautiful eyes, by the way. He then confessed, I must be cautious because I can feel myself falling in love with you so quickly. At that moment, I realized I too was in love with him, deeply in love. Later, while we were outside, my mother called. My boyfriend wanted to answer, and I thought he was joking, but when I said sure, he answered the call. He introduced himself as my friend and invited her to join us. She accepted, and we all sat and talked together. Afterward, we made time to see one another every day after work as well as on lunch breaks. He was a cab driver and I worked as a non-medical wheelchair transportation driver, so our schedules largely aligned with only 2 days of conflict. We consistently communicated daily, texting without fail from that night until now. At some point early on, perhaps within the first couple of weeks, he rented a hotel room to escape the shelter and gain some privacy. He invited me to join him for a movie or a meal. I should have known what would happen, but I opted to go anyway. I spent the day with him and we ended up sleeping together. Afterward, I felt guilty and returned home where my now ex-husband lay on the bed. Taking a seat in a chair, I confessed, I made a mistake, I slept with another man. His response was emotionless. I thought perhaps he didn't understand or was in shock, so I clarified. I just had sexual relations with another man. For all I know, I could be pregnant by him. Which, of course, I wasn't and still am not. I wanted to make sure my ex-husband fully grasped what had transpired. I had no clear expectations for his reaction, but it was not what I anticipated. He simply patted the bed and said, it's okay, come lay down next to me. The entire situation turned awkward. Regardless, my boyfriend and I continued to meet daily for several months. During that time, I discovered at least twice that he attempted to reconnect with his escort girlfriend. This hurt me significantly and made me feel betrayed, even though we were not officially committed at that point. I confronted him about it, holding him accountable, and helped keep him away from her and her drugs. According to him, I likely saved his life or, at the very least, kept him from going to prison because her presence was harmful. As time passed, he began to recognize the precarious path he could have taken. He now tells me and others that I helped save his life. Eventually, his family learned about our relationship and questioned him about it. He acknowledged it and explained a little about me, specifically that I had a child and was not Romanian, prompting their immediate disapproval based solely on those two factors. My boyfriend entered a program through the shelter providing him with a small apartment to share with a roommate. His responsibility was to follow their rules, work, and save as much money as possible, required to save 80% of each paycheck. In return for following these guidelines, he could stay rent-free while building savings. The program was intended to last for 90 days, starting in September 2022. He adhered to it meticulously, maintained sobriety, and saved money, creating a foundation to become self-sufficient. Once the program concluded, they were supposed to assist him in obtaining his own apartment, covering the first month's rent and providing furniture, essentially enabling him to build an emergency fund and establish a stable living environment. However, despite beginning the program in September, they had not secured a place for him or many other participants by the end of January or the beginning of February, leaving him still in that transitional housing. By late January, I decided I needed to move on from the dismal, lonely environment with my now ex-husband. I required a cleaner and safer space for my son. Additionally, I could not continue seeing someone while residing with someone else. It felt morally wrong and I was over it. Though I had hoped for improvement, I knew deep down it wouldn't come. I sensed that if I didn't leave, I would face issues concerning my son's environment, which I wanted to avoid. Therefore, I sought a place designed to aid families or single mothers in securing shelter. I spoke with someone who introduced herself as a mandated reporter. Naturally, I did not want to reveal everything, so I kept my situation vague, explaining that I needed a better environment for my son and me. As a result, she placed me on a waiting list and I departed. However, my concern lingered that someone might come to evaluate my situation and that I could potentially lose my son. Consequently, I concluded I would leave despite my fears and seek a hotel for my child and me, working daily to pay for our stay until something materialized. While packing our things, a loud knock pounded on the door. It was the police and they announced themselves clearly. I was terrified, so I hid in the bathroom with my son and called my boyfriend, asking him to pray that they would leave quickly and that I wouldn't encounter any trouble. He agreed but added, "Tell me the address and I will be right there. I'll ensure they're gone and take you both away." He did just that. He came over, circled around to check that they had departed, then helped me and my son into the work van he used even though he wasn't supposed to do so. He drove us away from that situation, which was more than I expected, and once we arrived at the motel, he went in using the money I provided for the night, saying he would rent it in his name. He did this so my now ex-husband wouldn't find us in the system if he looked. Upon his return, I discovered that he had not only paid for one night but a full week out of his own money. Remember, this was February 1, 2023, right before the Super Bowl when hotel rates soared even for the worst accommodations, but he seemed unconcerned. He didn't stop there. After settling our room, he took us to Walmart and spent over $500 on everything we needed: a crib mattress, bottles, milk, the works. He even bought food and water bowls for our dog, along with food, a harness, and a leash. He truly covered everything. It was the first time I genuinely felt he loved me sincerely, as such gestures don't come solely from a desire to be nice. Upon returning to the hotel with our supplies, he helped bring them inside, but he also brought himself in and didn't leave. He stayed that night, moving his few belongings from the transitional housing apartment he'd occupied for 5 months into the hotel with me. He left that program. You see, he was not supposed to touch the savings he had accumulated over $15,000 until concluding the program and obtaining his place. However, he chose to use it anyway to assist us. Whether it was out of love or pity, he made that decision. A few days into our hotel stay, while sitting in the car's back hatch, I asked him, "Can we be official boyfriend and girlfriend, exclusive to one another? Do you want that?" "Because I do." It took him only a few seconds to respond as he replied, "Yes." At that moment, we officially became an exclusive couple. We ultimately secured an apartment in March, and by the time we moved in, every penny of his savings had vanished. He had left his job to help us, so we had to find new work, which we did. We lived in that apartment together from March 2023 until the end of August 2024, at which time we had to relinquish it due to financial constraints. It has been a challenging journey, but we are currently in a studio that is slightly more affordable. On a side note, I feel it's important to mention that during the early days of our relationship, perhaps a week or two in, my boyfriend often stated that he was not looking for a relationship and primarily wanted to focus on work, his spiritual growth, and his family. However, during his time in the program, he frequently mentioned that once he secured his apartment, I would be welcome to come over to hang out and watch movies. I assumed that this also implied other activities typical of a serious relationship, leading to the conclusion that he was comfortable keeping me as a secret, leading a double life while trying to present a facade of expectations to his family. This presents my dilemma. His actions did not align with his words. His spoken intentions indicated, "I don't want a relationship," while his actions suggested otherwise, leaving me confused. Throughout our time together, we've broken up verbally several times, often initiated by him. The latest breakup occurred in August 2024, during which I thought it was final. I packed my and my son's belongings in the car and left with no intention of returning. However, not even 5 minutes had passed before he called me, utterly distraught, saying, I messed up, I don't know what I am doing. I was reluctant to return due to the pain I had endured from this constant back and forth, yet I felt compelled deep down to check on him. Upon arriving, I found him on the floor, crying profusely. I embraced him, comforted him, and assured him of my love. I left the decision of what to do next in his hands. After wiping his tears, he sat down in a chair and expressed, I need more time to make a final decision. If we go together to get a marriage license, can I have more time? I must warn you that I might not marry you, and you should know that you take a risk if we proceed, but if you are okay with that, do you want to go get a marriage license and give me time to think about it? I replied, okay, let's do it. Thus, we went that very same day to obtain a marriage license. At the end of August, we vacated our apartment and briefly stayed in hotels until we secured our current studio. We are now nearing the end of the year, and he has resolved to make a final decision by New Year's. Despite our mistakes, neither of us feels comfortable living together without being married. It is not how we were taught to do things. Consequently, we are refraining from sexual intimacy, which is vital to me. I receive mixed signals from him. There are days of affection and days of distance. The one unwavering truth is that I love him deeply and want him to be my forever. He is the most wonderful, amazing, funny, lovable, and sweet man I have ever encountered. Despite experiencing significant pain and often spending my days in tears, and the fear that he may choose to walk away, leaving both me and my son, who has grown very attached to him over the past 2 years, regardless of everything, I still harbor hope. I hope he will acknowledge my love for him and realize that I am not the other girl who hurt him so profoundly. I hope he recognizes he can make decisions without his father's approval, which seems somehow vital to him. Perhaps he uses this as an excuse since he successfully left home before, and had the other girl chosen to be with him, he would have pursued her regardless of how his family felt about it. However, he insists that his family's opinion matters greatly to him. During one of our verbal breakups, he told me, I need my dad's permission and consent. I wanted to believe he was joking, yet he was truly serious. My boyfriend exhibits a disorganized attachment style, often referred to as fearful avoidant, while I possess a very anxious attachment style. Clearly, neither of us has a secure attachment style, which is considered the healthiest type to possess, but we have yet to achieve that. I have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, commonly abbreviated as BPD. My boyfriend has not sought a professional diagnosis, but I suspect he might also have BPD. Furthermore, I believe he may showcase signs of bipolar disorder, as he experiences mood swings characterized by extreme highs, deep sadness, and irritability. He suffers from social anxiety, becoming unsettled in crowded situations, whether during shopping trips or even at a park. The reality is that we both have our issues, but I believe those can be addressed through time, effort, and commitment. I also genuinely believe that two people in love can grow together, work on self-improvement, and support one another in becoming improved versions of themselves. One additional point I believe is significant. My boyfriend's family wanted him to enter a specific program to assist him in overcoming his struggles with methamphetamine and his previous lifestyle, but he rejected that path. Instead, he sought to do it cold turkey on his own. They used this decision as an excuse to withhold any help, refusing to even deliver food when he was hungry and cold on the streets during winter when he contacted his father asking for assistance. They have effectively turned their backs on him, except for his father, who occasionally meets him at a neighborhood park. Even his twin sister did not wish him a happy birthday on his last birthday. Only his father reached out late in the day, followed by one of his brothers days later. He has not been welcomed back to the family home for a long time. They have not invited him for a single Thanksgiving, Christmas dinner, family barbecue, or gathering since 2020 before our paths ever crossed. However, now if he would leave me and comply with their wishes, they would supposedly start being a family again and gradually reconnect. His father would magically visit him at his new place, but along with that expectation, they demand he return to the shelter, restart his journey, and work his way back into their good graces. If he follows their directions and fits into their mold, they promise to reintegrate him into the family. Call me crazy, perhaps I am, but that doesn't seem like love to me. It feels like conditional love, an attempt to manipulate him into conforming to their desires rather than genuinely loving and allowing him to lead his life. I continuously tell my boyfriend that if we marry, his family will eventually accept that truth, and they may even welcome us over for a family barbecue or Thanksgiving dinner eventually. Yet I also caution him that if he leaves me, he risks the chance that they won't follow through with their promises and that he could end up alone. Regardless of what he chooses, I assure him he will never meet their endless expectations as they are unattainable. I also remind him that if he walks away from me, he loses me forever. If he chooses to stay, marry me, and pursue building a relationship with his family, they will likely accept our union, allowing him to have both me and them in his life. However, if he chooses to move on from me, there will never be a chance to build anything with me again, and I am serious. I will be done if he leaves, But if he does and his family doesn't pan out, he will ultimately be alone, left thinking about the one that got away, pondering the woman who loved him unconditionally from the very beginning. He once told me that on the day we first met in the classroom at work, he looked at me and thought, God or whoever, it doesn't matter, just let me have her, I have to have her. Now that he has me, he appears hesitant to take the next step, partly due to his family's opinions from those who abandoned him. He seems to fear committing to raising my son, even though he has kindly stepped into that role for the past 2 years. He believes I could find someone better than him, but I repeatedly assure him, I don't want someone better, I want you. I love you with all my heart and we need you. He has expressed a pledge to God that if we do not work out, he plans to remain single and celibate for the rest of his life to avoid causing someone else pain. Believe me, if he exits my life, I will be done with relationships entirely, closing myself off to the prospect of being with another man. This situation has potentially scarred the warm, open part of my heart that someone could have cherished. However, that is the crux of the story, long and arduous as it is. My question now is, does anyone else have a similar story or regret about someone they let go? Any advice for me regarding my boyfriend, whom I affectionately call my flower? I genuinely love this man, and while he knows that, I believe he is partly scared of being hurt again, particularly about what will happen after marriage. I keep telling him, nothing will change, I will still be me, and the only difference will be that we can finally express our love physically. Given all we have endured together, I feel confident that we can navigate through anything else that arises. I apologize for the lengthy post. If you have read through to this point, I sincerely appreciate it. Please share your stories, experiences, and advice, as different perspectives are invaluable. Thank you so much.